I felt myself shivering in the fresh night air, standing outside the house I had bought so hard, now locked up by the very people who claimed to love me. It was silently cold outside. The stars looked at me with arrogant detachment, as if they too were participating in this conspiracy of silence. I was standing on the threshold of my past, but already at a distance that seemed insurmountable. Margaret's cold voice rang out from behind the door, as if an iron tread were tapping out the final verdict in the silence. "Grace, this house no longer belongs to you." She said it calmly, even with a slight tinge of regret, but I knew her voice was devoid of sincerity. It was Trevor's house now. My heart clenched with pain, as if the shreds of my soul had been torn out and scattered on the floor, but at the same time something else was growing with fear and anger determination. I knew that I would have to fight not only for myself, but also for the future of my child, the hope for which I cherished in the most difficult moments. My name is Grace Thompson, and I'm 34 years old. I am an investment analyst, a woman who has dedicated her life to creating financial independence, confidence, and stability that allowed me to look boldly into the future. Looking back, I saw a long journey full of sleepless nights and morning coffees in the silence of my office, when every invested hour, every risky step brought me closer to my dream. Finally, after years of hard work, I was able to afford my dream home in Austin, an elegant $7 million building that has become a symbol of my success and my independence. This house was not just a property, it was a part of my soul, a refuge, a place of strength and pride. But everything collapsed when Trevor Harrison came into my life. Trevor, a 37-year-old software engineer, a man with incomparable charm and a sharp mind, turned my head. Our first meetings were like a wonderful dream in which it seemed that we were made for each other. Our wedding day was perfect, filled with tenderness and promises. It seemed like the beginning of a new, bright chapter. But no matter how much I dreamed of happiness then, it never occurred to me that this chapter would one day turn into pain and disappointment, and that my heart would be broken into hundreds of pieces. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the clouds began to thicken. At first, everything seemed to be just minor misunderstandings, easily corrected with the help of patience and wisdom. But then Margaret, Trevor's mother, invaded our lives, a 63-year-old retired college professor who was used to commanding and giving instructions as if she were the ruler of her own kingdom. At first, I tried to show respect and understanding. I knew how much Trevor meant to her, and I believed that I could find a common language with her. However, her interference was increasingly destroying the world that I had worked so hard to create. Margaret came without warning, almost like a thundercloud suddenly hanging over my house. She criticized my choice, undermined my authority, and commented on every corner, every element of the decor, as if it were her own patrimony. "Grace, you really should make repairs," she said with a contemptuous smile, her words poisoning the air, as if I were not the hostess, but a random guest temporarily residing in this house. "This house deserves a more sophisticated approach," she added, as if she didn't notice how my confidence was slipping with every word. I tried to be patient. I told myself that this was a test to be passed, that my efforts would be rewarded. But with each visit, her criticism became more merciless. One evening, when Trevor returned from work, I plucked up the courage and approached him with a request to discuss the boundaries. "Can we talk about your mother?" I asked cautiously, hoping that he would understand that I felt suffocated in my own house. However, his response was cold, as if he was under the power of forces unknown to me. "Grace, she's just trying to help," he said, avoiding my gaze. "Family comes first, you need to learn how to get along with it." His words left me with the feeling that I was hitting the wall he had put between us. For the first time, I realized that the person I loved and believed in might never stand up for me. I was a stranger, alone in a place that I once called home. Evelyn immediately got down to business, her eyes sparkling with the determination and calm strength that have always inspired me. She didn't let anything distract her, diving into details, picking up old documents, checking all contracts and agreements that could confirm my rights. When I sat across from her in her office, bathed in the soft light of an autumn morning, I felt a little more confident knowing that there was a person next to me who was ready to fight for justice. "Grace, they can't take away what's rightfully yours," Evelyn said firmly, flipping through the pages of documents. "I know that this house is not just a place where you lived, it is a symbol of your achievements, efforts, and independence. They're wrong to think they can oust you so easily." Her words penetrated me like a warm ray in the dark, reminding me that I have strength, that I am not alone in my struggle. Evelyn, with her clear understanding of justice and impeccable legal training, was ready to go all the way. She saw the injustice that had been done to me, and resolutely directed all her energy to correct it. Meanwhile, I returned to my parents, whose support has become a real refuge for me during this difficult period. Their home has always been filled with warmth and care, and the moment I crossed the threshold of their modest home, crushed by betrayal, my mother rushed to me, hugging me as if she could heal all my wounds with one gesture. My father, standing a little apart, smiled at me with his quiet, soothing smile. His eyes shone with determination and love. "You're not alone, Grace," he said, his voice sounding like a low whisper of hope. "We'll handle this together." Their words and care enveloped me like a soft mist, settling in my heart and helping me stay on my feet. I knew that despite the feeling of loss, I needed to focus on getting back what belonged to me. The house that I had been building for so long in my life was not just a physical space, it was a symbol of my freedom, my efforts, and ambitions. I couldn't let Margaret and Trevor destroy everything I had worked so hard to create. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the wave of anxiety that swept over my head. Every step on the marble floor of the court, every glance at the snow-white walls and majestic columns reminded me that I was on the verge of fighting for my dignity, for my home, for my unborn child. Evelyn walked beside me, her confident steps, cold, focused gaze and calm smile were like an anchor for me, supporting me in a storm of emotions. There was silence in the courtroom, broken only by the barely audible whispers of Trevor and Margaret and their lawyer. They sat there with an air of absolute confidence, not deigning to look at me, as if I were nothing, just an obstacle on their way to full control. Their smug faces sparked a new surge of determination in me. I remembered what I had to go through, the pain I felt when I realized the betrayal, and the anger that grew every time they tried to bring me to my knees. Evelyn, calm and collected as always, carefully laid out our evidence on the table in front of us. I saw her look appraisingly at Trevor and Margaret, her lips compressed into a thin line, an expression that I already knew as a sign of her combat readiness. She knew that not only my fate was being decided in this room, but also justice. Her confidence was transmitted to me, and in that moment I realized that I had not come here to beg, but to protect what was rightfully mine. The process has begun. Trevor and Margaret's lawyer diligently built an image of a caring mother and a committed family values husband, who allegedly always sought my well-being. He talked about their supposedly selfless care and commitment to my safety, trying to create the illusion that all their actions were just a manifestation of kindness. But to me, every word he said was empty and false. I knew that behind this image there was an unscrupulous desire for power, manipulation, and coercion that I was subjected to in my own home. When it was Evelyn's turn, she stood up with a grace and confidence that always thrilled me. She stated the facts clearly and consistently, without giving Trevor and Margaret the opportunity to dismiss the evidence. She presented to the court recordings of messages and calls, documented evidence of how I was isolated, controlled, and humiliated. With every word she said, with every new piece of evidence, it seemed that the very air in the courtroom was changing. Even Trevor and Margaret seemed to be losing their confidence, their smug smiles gradually fading. Evelyn clearly described every detail of my experience, revealing to the court the full depth of the emotional and psychological abuse I was subjected to. She focused on how Margaret's manipulation and control invaded my life, destroying my home and undermining my self-esteem. Every argument she made was flawless. Every fact seemed like a piece of a complex mosaic that showed the true face of Trevor and his mother. When Evelyn finished, I felt naked in front of the court, but also strong at the same time. It was like freeing myself from the weight of a lie that had been hanging over me for a long time. I knew that I had opened my heart, shown my pain, and decided to fight, even if it meant facing the darkest sides of people I once considered close. As the court session continued, my gaze met Margaret's for a moment. There was not a drop of remorse in them, only cold disdain and dull anger. She believed to the last that she could prevail, that her iron will and power over her son would help break me, as always. But this time I was ready to fight, and in the courtroom I was no longer the woman who once quietly gave in for the sake of family peace. I stood in front of the judge, feeling every word I uttered flow from the depths of my pain, my loss, and my desire for justice. I looked into the eyes of this calm woman, who seemed to penetrate through my words, discerning sincerity and suffering in them. Her expression remained calm, but there was something in her eyes that told me she understood the severity of what I had to go through. I saw her gaze linger on me a little longer than required by simple protocol. When I finished my speech, I could see Trevor's face slowly turning red. He sat there, obviously avoiding looking at me, as if every word I said turned into a sharp point aimed directly at his conscience. His mother, Margaret, on the other hand, could not resist periodically glancing in my direction, fidgeting in her seat with an air of annoyance and displeasure. Her silent contempt seemed unshakable, but even it could not hide her concern. Her lips tightened into a thin line, and her gaze became more and more intense. The judge nodded, indicating that my speaking time had come to an end. Then her attention turned to Trevor. He was called to the podium, and I noticed how his confidence, the very quality that once seemed to me unshakable and inspiring, now trembled under the gaze of justice. He stood up, looked at the judge, at Evelyn, and then glanced at me fleetingly, as if looking for sympathy, which was no longer there. Trevor began to speak carefully, trying to choose the words so as to create an image of himself as a caring husband, a man trapped between two fires. His voice sounded muffled, as if he didn't believe what he was saying. "I just wanted to be a mediator between my wife and my mother," he said, emphasizing the word mediator, as if that one word could absolve him of all responsibility. He tried to portray himself as vulnerable, caught in the middle of an inevitable conflict, but every word he said seemed empty, artificial, as if he was trying to read a role that did not suit him at all. There was no real remorse in his voice, just an attempt to put himself in a better light. Evelyn stared at him, watching as he struggled to piece together the pieces of his shattered trust, trying to hide his indifference under a thin mask of concern. The judge listened to him with the same attentiveness she had listened to me, but it was obvious that Trevor's words did not have the same effect. I saw how her gaze became more and more critical, as her notes of interest gradually turned into severe concentration. Margaret sat tensely, her hands tightly clasped, and she fidgeted more and more in her seat, clearly feeling that their position was becoming less convincing. Evelyn, with her firm confidence and impeccable professionalism, took the floor again, presenting the evidence gathered in more detail. She emphasized how Margaret purposefully invaded my life, how she tried to usurp my place in the house, in family affairs, regardless of my feelings and desires. She described in detail how every attempt to set boundaries turned into humiliation for me, how even my motherhood was questioned. When Evelyn mentioned Margaret's control over me and her cold, cynical words about my pregnancy, I noticed a slight whisper in the hall. Evelyn's every word penetrated the souls of those present, painting the image of a woman who would stop at nothing in order to subjugate someone else's life. I stood in the courtroom, holding my breath, watching the judge, who seemed to gather all the power of justice in herself before delivering a verdict. Her stern gaze moved between Margaret, Trevor, and me, as if in each of the sides she saw a reflection of her own conscience and the gravity of her decisions. Her voice sounded even, but every shade of it echoed in my soul. Based on the evidence presented and the testimony heard today, she began, making a brief pause that hung in the silence like the last moment before a thunderstorm. It is obvious that Grace Thompson was subjected to serious emotional and psychological abuse. Her voice was warm, but full of inner strength, and every word penetrated right into the depths of my pain, as if acknowledging my struggle and open heart. The actions of Trevor Harrison and Margaret Harrison were not only manipulative, she continued, and at that moment I noticed Trevor look away, but also put Miss Thompson and her unborn child at risk. Such behavior is unacceptable and, more importantly, should not go unpunished. Evelyn was standing next to me, and when I turned to her, her face shone with calm determination, her eyes sparkled with satisfaction, which, however, she kept under strict control. She knew like no one else that this was not the end, but this moment was our small but important triumph. It seemed to me that I was breathing easier, as if the years of oppressive fear and despair were beginning to go away, and a new force was emerging in their place. The judge paused briefly, allowing everyone present to realize the weight of what was said before continuing. In the light of the facts presented and taking into account all the circumstances of this case, her voice sounded like a final court of justice. The court decides that the house and other assets in question remain the property of Miss Thompson. These words resonated in me with unprecedented joy, like music that I had not heard for a long time. Everything seemed to freeze around me, and for a moment I was left alone with the feeling I had been waiting for so long, the feeling of recovery, liberation, and confidence in the future. I saw Margaret's lips tighten, her self-confidence gone, her face pale, as if she couldn't believe that her control had been destroyed. Trevor sat motionless, as if startled, and I could see that his face expressed a mixture of shame and confusion. He was a man who had been used to hiding behind the screen of his mother's will for a long time, but now, with every word the judge uttered, he seemed to realize that the reliable protection he had relied on had crumbled. One afternoon, when the sun was gently flooding the rooms of my house with warm light, resounding in every corner as a symbol of renewal, I heard a knock on the door. It was Evelyn, my faithful friend and lawyer, whose strength and faith in justice helped me survive this whole ordeal. She came in, her stern look softened by a slight smile, and we both knew that this was our common victory, a victory that we had suffered and won. We sat down in the living room, which now breathed peace and comfort, framed by soft tones and light, which I carefully surrounded myself with. Evelyn looked around, noting the changes, and nodded with a smile, as if she approved of the atmosphere I had created for myself and for my unborn child. Her pride in me was obvious, and this realization overwhelmed me with gratitude for her invaluable support. "You did it, Grace," she said with a warm smile, her voice full of tenderness and pride. "You not only passed this test, but also created a new life for yourself and your future. I know how hard it was for you, but now you have something more than just a house." I nodded, feeling tears coming to my eyes, but now they were tears of joy and relief, not pain. Evelyn's words reminded me how deeply I plunged into this struggle, how every day caused me fear and anxiety, and how every step was given to me with great difficulty. But now, sitting here, surrounded by silence and peace, I felt that all this was not in vain. This house was no longer a place of fear or manipulation. Now it was my refuge, a place where I could raise my child in love and safety. Evelyn raised her glass of tea, and we both laughed a little, realizing that this moment deserved much more celebration. To you, Grace, and to your new beginning, she said, and I raised my glass, feeling grateful that I now had the opportunity, support, and strength to move forward. We drank to this house, to a new life, to what had finally happened. In the following days, I continued to equip the house. I got rid of all the memories left over from Margaret and Trevor, freeing up space for new beginnings and bright days. The rooms were gradually filled with light shades, symbolizing the freedom and purity that I had been striving for so long. Every corner of this house now belonged to me and my child, and no shadows of the past could touch us anymore. Trevor and Margaret faced the consequences of their actions. Fines and court costs robbed them of their former financial peace of mind, and rumors of the trial spread quickly, undermining their reputation in society. Those who once respected Margaret for her professional achievements now saw her only as a woman who tried to deprive her daughter-in-law of home and peace. She lost the authority she had painstakingly built up over the years, and her condescending demeanor turned against her. Trevor, in turn, was also left in the eyes of those around him as a man whose weakness and inability to protect his wife put him in an unsightly light. Every day I felt my life coming back to me, becoming brighter and fuller. My parents, as always, were there for me, helping me with every detail, from painting the walls to choosing furniture for the children's room. Their support was my anchor, and their confidence that I could do it gave me strength. My father, with unfailing pride and a warm smile, often said, "You're stronger than you think, Grace. Now you've finally found your freedom." One evening I was sitting by the window, watching the evening twilight fade into night, and I was thinking about what I was going to do. I knew there would be many more difficulties ahead, but now, with this house, with the support of family and friends, I felt ready for any challenges. We were sitting in the living room, in this cozy, safe corner of my new world, sipping fragrant tea and talking about the future, which was finally in my hands. Evelyn, relaxing in an armchair, looked at me with a warm smile. Her voice sounded soft but proud, as if she saw something majestic in me. "You've come this far, Grace," she said, her words laced with genuine admiration. "You've shown incredible strength." I put my hand on my growing belly, and as if feeling the touch of the mother, the baby gently moved inside. It was a gentle, almost weightless movement that seemed to promise new life and new strength. My eyes were filled with light and warmth. For the first time in a long time, I realized that I was really stronger than I had ever thought. I looked at Evelyn and, with a slight smile on my lips, said, "I want my child to grow up in a home filled with love and security." Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with a playful sparkle. "So what's next?" "What is it?" she asked. "What are your big plans for the future?" I smiled, dreaming about what once seemed distant and unreal. "I would like to continue to develop in my career, and maybe one day I will even open my own real estate consulting firm. But now..." I paused, feeling the joy growing inside me at the thought of the near future. Right now, I'm focused on becoming the best mother I can be. In the following weeks, I immersed myself in preparing for the birth of my child. Every day filled me with anticipation and hope. My parents were thrilled that they would soon become grandparents. Their care and love enveloped me, creating a reliable, impenetrable shield around me. Now I no longer felt like a victim trapped in the bonds of fear and pain. I became a survivor, strong and ready for any challenges that life could bring me. One evening I was sitting in the nursery, which became the embodiment of my desire to create a space full of peace and love. I rocked gently in the rocking chair I had bought for night feedings, and looked with awe at the soft golden light flooding the room. Pastel, colored wallpaper, toys neatly arranged on shelves, a cozy blanket on a small cot, all this testified to a new stage in my life. I leaned forward, putting my hand on my stomach, and whispered to my unborn child, You are loved. And you will always have a strong, brave mother who will protect you no matter what. My life has come full circle, from being broken and feeling powerless to gaining strength, confidence, and inner peace. The journey I went on was painful, full of losses and hard lessons. But it gave me something more. It turned me into a woman who knows her worth, who stands on solid ground and looks to the future with readiness for everything that may come her way.